Snow covered the quiet streets like a white blanket as Ethan sat alone in his small apartment. The heater rattled weakly in the corner, doing little to fight the cold creeping into his bones. He had just finished his late shift at the office building where he worked as a janitor. His hands still smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, and his back ached from hours of scrubbing floors no one noticed. He dropped into the old couch, hoping for rest, when his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a picture from his niece's social media. She stood in front of a glowing Christmas tree, surrounded by people Ethan knew too well. His entire family. His sister Miranda's house looked like something out of a magazine. Twinkling lights, silver decorations, tables filled with food, and guests dressed in their best clothes. The caption read, "Best Christmas party ever. Aunt Miranda knows how to throw one." Ethan's heart sank. He hadn't received an invitation this year. At first, he thought it was an oversight. Maybe his invitation got lost in the mail. But deep down, he knew better. Miranda was always careful, always deliberate. Everything she did had meaning. He scrolled through more photos. His parents' old friends were there. His cousins, his nephews, even his old schoolmates, all laughing, hugging, enjoying the warmth of family. Everyone but him. The more he looked, the more he felt like an outsider in his own bloodline. He dialed Miranda's number, his fingers trembling slightly. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Ethan, Merry Christmas." "How are you?" "Hey," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I just saw the photos. Looks like everyone's there." There was a short silence. Then she sighed softly. "Yeah." "About that. About what?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "It's just, I thought it might be better if you sat this one out," she said, her tone careful, as if she was afraid to sound harsh but couldn't help herself. "Why?" Ethan asked. "What did I do?" "You didn't do anything wrong," she said quickly. "It's just, well, you're working as a janitor now. It's not exactly the kind of thing people at the party would understand. I didn't want you to feel uncomfortable." Ethan froze. "Uncomfortable?" he repeated slowly. "You mean embarrassed?" "Ethan, don't take it like that," Miranda said. "It's not about you. It's about the atmosphere. You know how people talk. They might ask questions, and I don't want anyone judging you." He let out a hollow laugh. "Judging me? Or judging you for having a brother who cleans floors?" Her silence was the answer he didn't need to hear. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Years of memories flashed in his mind. How he had helped her when she was a single mother struggling to pay bills. How he had fixed her roof for free when it leaked. How he had looked after her kids when she worked late. Every time she called, he showed up. He never cared that she lived in a big house while he rented a small apartment. Family was family. At least he thought it was. Now she was ashamed of him. "All right," he said finally, his voice calm but cold. "Thanks for being honest, Miranda. I wouldn't want to ruin your party." "Ethan, wait," she started, but he had already ended the call. The silence in the room felt heavy. He looked around at his small Christmas decorations. Just a cheap plastic tree and a few paper snowflakes taped to the window. It wasn't much, but it was his home. He had worked hard for everything he owned. And yet, at that moment, it all felt small, almost meaningless compared to the humiliation he felt. He sat there for hours, staring at the lights on his tiny tree flickering weakly. The words "just a janitor" echoed in his head. They stung more than he expected. He thought about his coworkers, people like him who worked tirelessly in the background, often invisible but essential. Why should he be ashamed? Why should anyone be? Still, the hurt ran deep. Family wasn't supposed to treat you like this. Miranda had always been proud and image-conscious. Ever since her husband's business took off, she acted like she lived in a different world. Expensive cars, designer clothes, fancy parties. Everything had to look perfect. She liked control, liked people admiring her. Ethan had ignored her arrogance for years, telling himself that beneath it all she still cared. But now he wasn't so sure. He picked up the small wrapped gift he had bought for her. Nothing fancy, just a framed photo of them as kids building a snowman in front of their old house. He had planned to give it to her tonight, hoping it would remind her of simpler times. Now, it sat in his lap like a forgotten piece of the past, anger mixed with disappointment in his chest. But beneath it all was something stronger, resolve. He didn't want to hurt her. He didn't want to beg for her approval either. He wanted her to see that worth wasn't about money or status, that being a janitor didn't make him less human, that being humble didn't mean being weak. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, snowflakes drifted down under the streetlights, soft and silent. The city was quiet except for the faint sound of distant laughter and church bells ringing somewhere far away. It reminded him of Christmas from their childhood, back when they didn't have much, but they had each other. Back when Miranda used to defend him in school, when she told everyone her little brother was the kindest person she knew. What happened to that sister? He wondered. The answer didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what he would do next. Ethan's mind began to race. If Miranda thought his job made him unworthy, maybe he needed to remind her what true value looked like. He wouldn't confront her with anger. He wouldn't show up at her party demanding respect. That would only prove her right. No. He would do something better, something that spoke louder than any argument ever could. That night, as the world slept and snow piled up outside, Ethan opened his notebook and began to write. Ideas flowed like sparks, plans for something meaningful, something that would turn his pain into purpose. A small Christmas event, perhaps, for people like him, people who worked hard, unnoticed, and deserved a moment of joy. He didn't have much money, but he had time, determination, and a heart that refused to stay broken. He called a few contacts he'd made through his job, security guards, janitors, maintenance staff. People who also had stories of being overlooked. They listened, and one by one they agreed to help. A small group began to form. By midnight, Ethan had mapped out his plan. It wouldn't be a revenge of cruelty. It would be a revenge of kindness. A lesson that Miranda wouldn't forget. When he finally closed his notebook, exhaustion weighed on his eyes, but something inside him felt alive again. For the first time that night, he smiled. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had turned into something powerful. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the city in white silence. Somewhere across town, Miranda laughed among her guests, unaware that her brother, the janitor, was about to show her what true worth really meant. Ethan looked once more at the small Christmas tree, its cheap lights blinking softly. "Merry Christmas," he whispered, not to her, but to himself. This year he would make Christmas his way, not with money, not with pride, but with meaning. And as he turned off the lights and lay down to rest, one thought burned in his mind. She had excluded him from her party, but soon she would wish she hadn't, because this time he wasn't going to prove her wrong with words. He was going to prove it with actions. And that decision, made in a small apartment on a cold December night, would change both their lives forever. Ethan woke up the next morning with a clear purpose burning inside him. The sting from his sister's rejection still lingered, but now it pushed him forward instead of holding him back. He didn't want revenge that destroyed. He wanted revenge that revealed. He wanted to show Miranda, and maybe even himself, that dignity wasn't about how much money you had, but what you did with it. He started his day like usual, sweeping the marble floors of the office tower. The echo of his broom on the tiles kept rhythm with his thoughts. Around him, people walked past, busy, distracted, barely noticing him. But he noticed everything, every tired face, every forced smile. He realized how many people worked hard and still went unseen. He thought of them as the invisible ones, people like him who kept the world running quietly. That thought stayed with him long after his shift ended. That night, he sat again at his small desk, a cheap lamp glowing over his notebook. He began listing ideas. A Christmas event for people who didn't get to celebrate. Janitors, cleaners, security guards, delivery workers. People who couldn't afford luxury but deserved joy. He would organize it himself. He didn't know how yet, but he would find a way. Ethan began calling people he knew. Old co-workers, church volunteers, neighbors. At first, many were hesitant. "It sounds great," one woman said, "but who's funding it?" Ethan paused, then smiled. "We will." He didn't have much money, but he had time, effort, and belief. Slowly, people started to believe too. Within days, he got permission to use the old community center near his apartment. It was dusty, cold, and half forgotten, but to Ethan, it looked like hope. He spent his evenings cleaning it, fixing broken chairs and painting old walls. His coworkers joined him after their shifts. They laughed while working, sharing stories of long hours and tired nights. It wasn't easy, but it felt meaningful. Soon word began to spread. Local shops offered small donations, bags of rice, canned food, secondhand toys. A bakery promised to provide bread and pastries. Even a local news reporter heard about it and stopped by. She asked him, "Why are you doing this?" Ethan smiled shyly. "Because everyone deserves a little light at Christmas, especially those who work in the dark." The reporter's story aired that week, titled, "The Janitor's Christmas Wish." It wasn't a big headline, but it reached hearts. Donations began to pour in. People sent clothes, food, and money. The community center filled up faster than Ethan expected. Volunteers offered to decorate, musicians offered to play for free, and families who had little still showed up to give something. Each night, Ethan stayed late to make sure everything ran smoothly. He fixed lights, arranged gifts, and made lists of families in need. He didn't have expensive suits or fancy invitations, but what he built was real. While Miranda's party boasted chandeliers and crystal glasses, his would glow with laughter and love. Meanwhile, across town, Miranda was busy perfecting her own Christmas Eve party. Her guest list included business owners, politicians, and old friends who admired her success. Every table was set with fine china, every candle perfectly placed. But when her assistant called to confirm attendance, something unexpected happened. Several guests declined. They're attending some community event instead, the assistant said, puzzled. Miranda frowned. Community event? Yes. Something called the Janitor's Christmas. The name irritated her, though she didn't know why. Well, she said coldly, if they prefer that, let them. We'll have a better evening anyway. But as days passed, she heard the name more often. Her friends mentioned it in passing. Even her husband brought it up. That janitor guy, Ethan Miller, I think, he's making the news. Seems like a good man. She froze when she heard the name. Ethan Miller, her brother. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. Then she saw the TV segment, Ethan standing under Christmas lights at the community center, smiling as he handed toys to children. The camera captured his gentle voice. When people look down on you, prove them wrong with kindness, not anger. Her heart sank. She turned off the TV, unable to look away from her reflection in the black screen. Shame washed over her. While she had excluded him from her party for being just a janitor, he had become the face of kindness and compassion. Meanwhile, Ethan's event grew bigger every day. On Christmas Eve morning, he arrived early at the center. Volunteers were already decorating the halls with paper snowflakes and garlands. Tables were lined with hot food, toys were piled under the tree, and cheerful music filled the air. For once, the people who always served others were the ones being celebrated. Ethan moved through the crowd, greeting everyone, checking details, making sure no one felt left out. He saw kids laughing, families hugging, and elderly people smiling with gratitude. The joy in their faces made every sleepless night worth it. Around noon, a reporter arrived again. Cameras rolled as she asked him how he felt. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow and said softly, "This isn't about me. It's about showing people that being humble doesn't mean being invisible. Sometimes the smallest acts can shine the brightest light." That night, Miranda's mansion was filled with guests, but the mood wasn't what she expected. People talked about Ethan's charity instead of her decorations. Some even shared photos from the event. Her husband leaned close and said, "Maybe we should stop by there. It's just a few blocks away." Miranda hesitated. Her pride screamed no, but her guilt whispered yes. She looked around at her glamorous party. Everyone looked perfect, but the air felt cold, hollow. For the first time, she noticed that behind all the smiles there was distance. She thought of her brother, surrounded by laughter that didn't cost a dime. Finally, she put down her champagne glass and said quietly, "Let's go." When Miranda arrived at the community center, she stood at the entrance, watching through the glass doors. The scene inside stunned her. The once empty hall glowed with warmth. Families shared meals, children opened presents, volunteers danced to cheerful music. Ethan was in the center, handing a box of toys to a little boy. His uniform was plain, but his eyes were bright. No one cared about titles or appearances. People hugged him, thanked him, smiled at him. For once, he wasn't invisible. He was seen, truly seen. Miranda stepped inside, hesitant. The crowd parted as she walked forward. Ethan noticed her and froze, the surprise clear on his face. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The music faded in the background. She finally spoke, her voice trembling. "You did all this?" Ethan nodded slowly. "With help. A lot of help." Miranda's eyes softened. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. Then she added, almost whispering, "I saw you on TV. You've done more good than I ever have." Ethan looked around at the happy faces. "I didn't do it to prove anything," he said. "I just wanted people to feel like they mattered. Including you." Her throat tightened. "You should have been at my party," she said, her voice breaking. He smiled gently. "I was never meant to be at that party, Miranda. I was meant to be here." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him. Her brother, the man she had pushed away, now surrounded by light. "Ethan," she said softly, "I'm sorry." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her a tray of food and pointed toward a group of volunteers. "Then help us serve dinner. That's how you can make it right." She nodded and joined them. For the first time in years, Miranda worked without worrying about her appearance or reputation. She handed out food, talked with families, and even laughed with the children. The warmth of that room melted the cold wall of pride she had built around her heart. By the end of the night, the hall was filled with music and laughter. Miranda and Ethan stood side by side, watching the joy they helped create. She turned to him and whispered, "I thought I knew what success looked like. I was wrong." Ethan smiled softly. "It's never too late to see it differently." As the night ended, Miranda realized her brother hadn't just forgiven her. He had taught her a lesson no amount of wealth could buy. Ethan's plan had worked, not through anger, but through grace. He hadn't just shown her his worth. He had reminded her of her own humanity. And as snow began to fall outside the community center, the sound of laughter echoed through the night. Proof that sometimes the best revenge is kindness. The morning after the Christmas event, the city lay quiet under a fresh layer of snow. The streets glistened as sunlight broke through the gray clouds, and a faint chill filled the air. Ethan stood outside the community center, his breath forming clouds in front of him. Inside, volunteers were cleaning up the remains of last night's celebration. Empty plates, ribbons, paper cups, and the laughter that still seemed to linger in the air. The event had ended hours ago, but its warmth stayed with him. He leaned against the railing, exhausted but peaceful. For weeks he had worked non-stop, organizing, collecting, fixing, and now it was over. Yet the feeling of fulfillment refused to fade. He had done it. He had turned pain into purpose. He had proven something to himself and to the world, though not in the way he once imagined. Still, one thought lingered in his mind. Miranda. Last night, after serving food and helping pack the remaining gifts, she had quietly left without saying much. She had looked shaken, emotional, and guilty. Ethan didn't chase after her. He wanted her to sit with what she had seen, to understand it on her own. But now, standing in the silence of the morning, he wondered what she was thinking. As he turned to go inside, a familiar voice broke the quiet. "You're up early," Miranda said softly. She stood at the gate, wrapped in a thick coat, her hair slightly messy as if she hadn't slept much. Her expensive boots crunched in the snow as she approached him. Ethan smiled faintly. "You too," he said. They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then Miranda spoke again, her voice trembling. "I wanted to thank you, and to apologize properly this time." Ethan said nothing, letting her speak. "I was horrible to you," she continued. "I told myself I was protecting you from being judged, but the truth is, I was the one judging. I thought success meant looking perfect, surrounding myself with people who could help my image. I forgot what real success is." Her words came out fast, as if she had been holding them in for too long. "When I saw you last night, helping people, smiling like that. I realized I've been living for the wrong reasons. My house was full of people, but it felt empty. Yours was full of strangers, and it felt like home. Ethan looked at her quietly, his expression unreadable. Then he said, I didn't do it to prove anything, Miranda. I just wanted to do something that mattered. I was angry, yes, but I knew hurting you wouldn't make me feel better. I wanted you to see that worth isn't measured by what we own. Miranda's eyes filled with tears. You did more than that, she said. You reminded me what family means. You reminded me who I used to be. They went inside together. The volunteers were still sweeping floors and stacking chairs. One of them waved at Ethan, thanking him again for organizing everything. Miranda watched the interaction, realizing how much respect her brother earned through kindness, not authority. When the cleanup was done, Ethan brought out a small box from his coat. I was going to give you this on Christmas Eve, he said, handing it to her. Inside was the framed photo he had bought earlier, the one of them as kids building a snowman in front of their old house. The picture was faded, but their smiles were bright and innocent. Miranda's hands trembled as she held it. You kept this all these years? Ethan nodded. It reminded me of better times, when we didn't care about money or appearances, just us together. She blinked back tears. I don't deserve this. Maybe not, Ethan said gently. But forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. They both stood in silence, memories flooding back, of childhood laughter, shared struggles, and the bond they once had. Slowly, the wall between them began to crumble. After a while, Ethan walked her to the door. Outside, the snow had stopped falling and sunlight glowed across the icy streets. Miranda turned to him, hesitant. You know, you could have humiliated me, she said quietly. You could have called me out in front of everyone, and I would have deserved it. Ethan smiled faintly. That's not what I wanted. I didn't need to make you small to make myself feel big. I just wanted you to see me for who I really am. She looked down, ashamed. And I do now, she whispered. He nodded. Then that's enough. They hugged, a slow, hesitant embrace that carried years of distance and misunderstanding. For the first time in a long while, it felt genuine. When she pulled away, she said softly, You've changed, Ethan. He chuckled. Maybe I just remembered who I was, Miranda smiled weakly. I'm going to change too. That evening, Ethan returned to his apartment. He sat by the window looking at the city lights. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. The loneliness that had once filled his heart had been replaced by something new. Peace. He wasn't rich, but he felt fulfilled. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He had found his worth in helping others, not in being accepted by those who had looked down on him. Meanwhile, Miranda made a decision of her own. The following week, she returned to the community center, not for publicity, but to help. She donated supplies, organized food drives, and even brought her children to volunteer. She wanted them to see what true generosity looked like. At first, the volunteers were surprised to see her there, but soon they welcomed her with open arms. Ethan watched quietly from a distance as she worked beside them, her designer clothes replaced by a simple sweater and gloves. He saw her laugh, not the polite laugh she used at her parties, but the kind that came from the heart. He realized that sometimes people don't change because you demand it. They change when you show them a better way to live. Weeks passed, and the story of the janitor's Christmas spread across the city. Local newspapers and news channels continued to share Ethan's story, calling him a symbol of humility and hope. He didn't care much for the attention, but he was glad it inspired others. Donations kept coming, and soon the community center became a year-round support space for struggling families. One evening, Miranda and Ethan stood outside the center as volunteers locked up for the night. The air was crisp, and the lights from the city shimmered in the distance. Miranda turned to him and said, I used to think revenge was about getting even. But what you did, that was something else. You showed me that kindness can be stronger than anger. Ethan smiled. Anger burns fast. Kindness lasts longer. She looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude. Thank you, Ethan, for not giving up on me. He shrugged lightly. Family doesn't give up. We just forget sometimes. They stood there for a while, watching the snow begin to fall again. This time, it didn't feel cold. It felt peaceful, cleansing. Miranda slipped her arm through his, and they walked home together in silence, their footsteps leaving twin trails behind them. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the pain, the long hours of planning, and finally, the forgiveness. It all came together like a quiet miracle. He realized that his greatest victory wasn't proving Miranda wrong. It was proving that goodness could heal even the deepest wounds. In the weeks that followed, Ethan continued his work as a janitor. But now, when people looked at him, they saw more than a man with a mop and bucket. They saw a man who brought a city together with nothing but kindness. And when he walked into buildings, people greeted him by name. Respect didn't come from his job title. It came from the way he carried himself. As for Miranda, she never hosted another grand party again. Each Christmas, she helped organize community dinners with Ethan. Her mansion's lights were dimmer, but her heart was brighter. She often told her children, "Your uncle taught me something important, that how you treat people matters more than what they do for a living." Years later, when people spoke of the story, they didn't call it the janitor's revenge. They called it the Christmas of forgiveness. And Ethan, standing once again under the twinkling lights of the community center, realized that true revenge wasn't about making someone regret their actions. It was about inspiring them to become better. He had done both. And that, he thought, was the best gift Christmas could ever bring.